So the last writer I'm going to be presenting today before the other curators take over is Malavika Shetty. Malavika? So Malavika is actually new to this area, and I keep forgetting how long it's been since you moved to Boston.
I moved about 9 months ago.
9 months? Like,
Pretty new.
yeah, like a full term.
Yes.
And what I wanted to ask you is that many of us here, if not most of us, are familiar with the isolation and the settling in pangs of a new city. I'm sure you're going through that yourself. You are, yeah. How is this different from when you first settled into your first city in America 20 years ago? How long ago? Yeah. Can you tell the difference?
It's actually very different. I think when you first move to a new country, you're truly, truly alone. You don't have any friends. And the thing is, you don't even know how to make friends because it's such a new culture. So I think, that's when you really feel alone and completely lost, and you try to look for familiarity, I think.
We talked about this before. It's almost like there's rules and you don't know them because they're unspoken. Nobody quite knows what they are. And you never know whether you're doing the right thing or right information. Right.
Okay, compared to it, so.
Like you have to.
Right, yes. Okay, can everyone hear me now?
Yeah. It's an intimate relationship.
Yes, with the mic, yeah.
Sorry. But thank you so much. This is Malavika Shetty telling us a story called Lunch at Mrs. Karnik's. Please enjoy. Thank you.
I moved to the US in the middle of November. It was a cold time to go to a new country and to begin a new marriage. But I did. Those first few months were very disorienting, of course. I did not know anyone. I had no friends. My husband was traveling all the time. I was in a city with very little public transport, and I did not know how to drive. And I did not have a job because my spouse visa did not enable me to work at that point in time. Anyway, needless to say, I was very alone. I spent a lot of time watching Seinfeld reruns and kind of looking out the window. One day, as I looked out of the window, I spotted the public library. It stood just across from my apartment. So I gathered my courage, put on my winter coat, not a very good coat now that I think about it, and walked across the snowy street. I pushed open the door of the public library, and the first person that I saw was an Indian woman. And she was wearing this beautiful silk sari. She had this red bindi in the middle of her forehead. Wow. She was standing behind the information counter, and she flashed me a welcoming smile. Mrs. Karnik, that was her name, became my friend. I would go to her for everything. She would tell me where the nearest Indian grocery store was. She would tell me where I could buy better winter clothes. She would also give me really good recommendations for Bollywood movies because the library had a really good collection of Bollywood movies, for some reason. Anyway, we both discovered that we loved Bollywood movies, and we would spend a lot of beautiful afternoons just talking about the movies and the actors and actresses back in India and their scandalous lives. We both discovered that we loved Amitabh Bachchan movies. We would talk about the dialogues and the scenes from the movies. Anyway, happy times. I would go almost every day, mainly because really there was nothing else I could do. So every afternoon, I would go across the street, open the door to the public library, and go chat with Mrs. Karnik. Mrs. Karnik gave me the friendship I so desperately craved at that point in time. And I felt like in her very American life, Mrs. Karnik appreciated being able to talk about Bollywood movies with me. One day, as I walked into the library, Mrs. Karnik looked even happier and excited than ever before. I mean, she was always this warm, jovial woman, but today she looked super excited. "What's up?" I said. "Oh, Malavika, we have to celebrate. Come to my house for lunch." "What are we celebrating?" I asked. After 30 years, I finally become an American citizen. Come, we have to come. We have to go to my house. Linda, my colleague from the library, is also coming. Let's all go together. Of course, I was thrilled. I mean, I had never been to anyone's house in this country, and I was curious about where Mrs. Karnik lived. And she had told me that she has a daughter my age, and I wanted to meet someone my age. So I went with Mrs. Karnik in her car. Linda followed in her car. As I entered Mrs. Karnik's house, the door was opened by a very grim-looking Mr. Karnik. He hugged Linda and said, "Come, come, Linda." Mrs. Karnik, in the meanwhile, had run into the kitchen, and Linda followed her there. Mr. Karnik then turned to me. He looked down at my shoes, and he said, in a very rude voice, "Please leave your shoes at the door." I looked at him in confusion. Why is he asking me to leave my shoes at the door? He hadn't asked Linda to leave her shoes at the door. In fact, Linda was in the kitchen right now, chatting away with Mrs. Karnik with her shoes on. Anyway, I did what he requested, but as I entered the house, I had this sinking feeling in my stomach. I did not want to talk to Mr. Karnik, so I kind of wandered off into the living room. On the living room sofa was a young girl my age. Mrs. Karnik's daughter, I thought, my spirits lifting. The girl was reading a magazine. She looked up from the magazine she was reading, gave me a bored look, and went right back to reading. I stood around uncertainly, not knowing what to do. Just then Linda bustled into the room. Mrs. Karnik's daughter got up with a squeal of delight and hugged Linda. The two of them stood there talking and laughing while I just stood around feeling completely left out and not knowing what to do. It was a great relief when Mrs. Karnik announced that lunch was served in the kitchen. We all went into the kitchen and sat around the kitchen dining table. Linda and Mrs. Karnik kept up the conversation. They talked about colleagues at the library. They talked about how cold the winter has been. They talked about upcoming vacations. The conversation kind of buzzed around me. I immersed myself in the food. I mean, this was food that I missed. It was familiar and warm. There was hot dal and hot rotis, so I concentrated on eating it. Mrs. Karnik's daughter, who was quietly talking with Linda, and with no one else really, suddenly said in this very loud voice, "I need to move to India." Sorry. No, that's not what she said now that I think about it. "I need to move to New York," that's what she said. "It's like India living in this house. People keep dropping in all the time." And she looked at me very pointedly when she said that. Why is she saying that, I thought? Why is she being so rude? And so scornful? In front of her parents to a guest? She doesn't know me. Anyway, I felt the sudden urge to leave. So I looked at Mrs. Karnik and said, "Do you think I could get a ride home?" Mrs. Karnik turned to her daughter and said, "Why don't you drop Malavika home? You two can get to know each other." Mrs. Karnik's daughter looked at her and said with a frown, "I'm busy." "Oh, don't worry, Malavika," Linda said. I can take you home. You know, I had to leave anyway, and you're on my way home. I can drop you." As I was leaving with Linda, Mrs. Karnik came to me and said, "Thank you so much for coming, Malavika. You have to come again. You know, ever since I met you, I always wanted you to be friends with my daughter. She knows nothing about Indian culture. I thought maybe you would teach her how Indian girls behave." On the way back home with Linda in the car, Linda kept gushing about how wonderful the Karniks were and how warm and friendly they were and how lucky we are to know them. I half listened to her as I watched the snowy sidewalk speeding by. I kept thinking about that lunch. Wow, that hadn't turned out the way I expected. What was it about that lunch that was bothering them most, I thought? Was it Mr. Karnik? Yes, he was obnoxious. I mean, doesn't he remember his own first few weeks in a new country? And what about the daughter? Her behavior was inexcusable. How could she be so rude to me? I mean, part of me wanted to empathize with her. I could see that her Indian heritage was at war with her American identity. But really what she did to me was, I don't think I could ever forgive that. And what about Mrs. Karnik, my friend? Were all those conversations in the library just leading up to this? Was she all along trying to recruit me to help her out with her daughter? Most of all, I think it was I wasn't expecting to be treated like this by what I consider to be my own people. As I entered my sparsely furnished apartment, I felt lonelier than ever before. After that day, I stopped going to Mrs. Karnik's library and started taking a bus to another branch of the public library. This branch did not have the Bollywood movies I loved, and I missed them a lot. But the bus got me out of my neighborhood. I began to explore new neighborhoods, new places. I met new friends. I began to explore America, this new country. Over the years, I thought often of Mrs. Karnik. I wondered if her daughter had moved to New York. I have a daughter of my own now, and she too grew up in this country I moved to so many winters ago. I like to think that Mrs. Karnik found someone else she could discuss Bollywood movies with. Perhaps Mrs. Karnik would invite her over for lunch. Thank you.